A slip and fall.
Yeah, that's how I put myself through bartending school.
So you were always like this?
Three iconic characters from the Breaking Bad universe were presented with a hypothetical time machine thought experiment where each was confronted about past regret. For Mike Ehrmantraut, he was initially tempted to list a date from the year his son Matty was murdered, where Mike subsequently took out the culprits. Whatever specific regret he was referring to, whether it was the empty feeling revenge provided him, or whether it was giving poor advice, or the fact Matty learned that Mike was down in the gutter with the rest of the dirty cops. Mike's initial thought revolved around Matty, but Mike was being honest in his self-reflection and realized his biggest regret was actually taking his first bribe. That was the decision Mike made that would later tarnish his own image in the eyes of Matty. For Walter White, it was easy to answer. His regret was walking away from gray matter. We already knew this, but it was reaffirmed here. Walt's regret was throwing away his potential. In Walt's case, however, he isn't being as honest as Mike. Even here, Walt's ego refuses to place any of the blame on himself. Instead, Walt blames Elliot and Gretchen. Walt believes they artfully maneuvered him out of his creation. Perhaps Walt is selling the contributions of Elliot and Gretchen short, or maybe not. Perhaps Walt is being truthful and they did profit tremendously from his innovation. Either way, the fact is Elliot and Gretchen grew the company, became wealthy, and saw their full potential. Walt, on the other hand, used his considerable intellectual talents to teach high school chemistry. The main point being, even if Walt's view is correct, and the two conned him out of his potential, Walt never again even tried to fulfill his potential after he walked away from gray matter. For James McGill, on the surface, his regret seems ridiculous and completely out of tune with the approach from Mike and Walt, where he seemed to neglect the entire spirit of the thought experiment. McGill's regret is doing a slip and fall scam where he injured his knee. But what Jimmy is actually doing here, in his own elusive roundabout way, is exactly the same and completely within the spirit of the thought experiment. The difference is, Mike was completely honest, Walt was as truthful and open as his ego would allow, and Saul masked his regret by hiding the heart of the matter and providing surface-level details that never connect the dots. But the dots are all there to be connected. Mike was the one who was completely honest and forthcoming. Mike recognized his downfall all began when he accepted his first bribe. This was the decision he made that led him down a bad choice road. Matty thought he idolized his father, but Mike was the one who actually idolized Matty, because in a very real way, Matty proved to have greater integrity. Indeed, Matty was made of sterner stuff. And the one thing that Mike was most ashamed of was breaking his boy. When he was forced to admit that he wasn't the hero his son imagined, he was down in the gutter with the rest of the dirty cops on the take. And from there, Mike continued down a bad choice road. For Mike, the point was later driven home when Nacho's old man called him out for being nothing more than the low-life gangster punk that he was. Walt was fairly straightforward, even if he made himself the helpless victim of Elliot and Gretchen's artful maneuvering. But at the end of the day, Walt's biggest regret wasn't just throwing away his potential when he took a buyout for his stake in gray matter, but worse, he never did anything else the rest of his life to try and fulfill his potential in any way, shape, or form. Not that being a high school chemistry teacher isn't a worthwhile career path. But for Walt, he was incredibly overqualified for that line of work. And worse yet, he found it was unfulfilling, and it prevented him from ever realizing his full potential. Only when he received his cancer diagnosis did Walt finally attempt to do something to fulfill that potential before it was too late. And to that end, Walter White succeeded. He became one of the best damn cooks out there. He amassed a small fortune in an extremely quick time frame, and he got to feel alive and finish his life on his own misguided terms, which allowed him to feed his own ego to the max. McGill was the least forthcoming, mentioning an injury in a slip and fall scam. Interesting that he did not name the time he first stole money from his father's business, when he learned the early lesson about wolves and sheep. But if you connect the dots, this injury almost certainly represents the moment when James McGill morphed into Slippin Jimmy. The fact that he injured himself in this particular slip and fall scam almost certainly indicated that this was either his first scam of this nature, or it was the most lucrative one that provided the most valuable experience points to become an effective con artist. Getting hurt taught him how to sell a big payout, or at least as big as the type of payouts he was getting during his formative Slippin Jimmy scams. Mike, Walt, and McGill all listed a regret that ultimately led them down a bad choice road. Mike took a bribe, tarnished his own image in the eyes of Maddie. He avenged his son and took out his killers. This was unfulfilling, and instead of trying to change course, Mike continued down a bad choice road, justifying it as a means to provide for his dead son's wife and daughter. At the end of the day, Mike became a stone-cold killer, a complete gangster, and he was ultimately killed by another gangster in one Walter White. Walt walked away from his potential, and more importantly, he never did a damn thing about it the rest of his life until he realized the end was near. Walking away from gray matter planted the seed. It festered in an unsatisfying life where he abandoned his potential. And only near the end did that pent-up rage explode in the form of Heisenberg. It may have taken Walt many years to go down that bad choice road, but the impetus for that venture was predicated on his breaking point with gray matter. And once he started down that bad choice road, things snowballed quickly. McGill became an opportunist con man after the slip and fall injury, which put him on a bad choice road that he never quite escaped, which got progressively worse with time. With McGill, we were subtly provided the last missing piece of the puzzle in the evolution of Goodman. Initially, we saw the path from Slippin Jimmy to Saul Goodman to Gene Takavic, but now we have the full picture, and the cycle is now complete. James McGill was the missing piece, his purest persona. James McGill evolved into Slippin Jimmy. Slippin Jimmy evolved into Saul Goodman. Saul Goodman morphed into a monster under the guise of Mean Gene Takavic. And at the end of the day, he reverted back to his James McGill roots, the person he was before he became Slippin Jimmy. The person he was before he injured himself that fateful day during a slip and fall scam that screwed up his knee. There was one instance in his past where he tried to abandon Slippin Jimmy and revert to his former James McGill glory, and that was after his brother Chuck had saved the day following the Chicago sunroof incident. Jimmy said farewell to Marco, and Jimmy moved on and attempted to put Slippin Jimmy behind him. From that point forward, Jimmy was trying to impress Chuck. He was working in the mailroom, and he secretly earned his law degree and passed the bar, believing this would make Chuck proud. We see this side of him, James McGill, in the flashback with Chuck. James was taking care of his brother and doing the right thing, for no other reason than this was his brother and it was the right thing to do. James was more than willing to make sacrifices in order to help Chuck. Incidentally, if Chuck had a time machine regret, it might well have been his insistence that Jimmy clean up his act after he saved him from the Chicago sunroof incident. Chuck could have stopped him then and there when he had the chance, or he could have at least left him to his ways and his scumbag life with Marco after he saved him. After James finally passed the bar, Chuck vouched for his brother, but Chuck was secretly disgusted by the whole thing. Chuck deliberately blocked James from getting a job at HHM, all the while using Howard as a proxy, making it appear as if Howard was the real villain. James struggled making it as a lawyer, where his Slippin Jimmy ways sometimes resurfaced. After James discovered the Sandpiper overcharge scheme, he brought it to Chuck. James was never happier than when it appeared he and his brother were going to work the case together as a brotherly duo. James mistakenly believed this was the culmination of him taking a good choice road, except it was nothing of the sort. He would soon learn of Chuck's betrayal, that Howard was merely a pawn for Chuck. This led him back to his Slippin Jimmy ways, where he reunited with Marco in a series of scams, the last of which saw Marco die. Jimmy handled betrayal the same way later with Kim after she broke things off, except by this time, he was already far removed from his purer James McGill form. Indeed, the toxic influence him and Kim exerted on each other pushed him into a more refined, more dangerous version of Slippin Jimmy. And when Kim confessed she had lied and betrayed him because she was having too much fun, this led Jimmy on the fast track to becoming the finished Saul Goodman product we knew from Breaking Bad. And ironically, Goodman's entire existence during this time frame was almost like a living tribute to his glory days with Kimmy Corleone. The life they may have had together, minus the hookers, had Howard not wound up at the wrong place at the wrong time as a direct result of the scheme orchestrated by Kim. When Jimmy tried to take a good choice road and make Chuck proud, it backfired and bit him in the ass. Jimmy wanted to be a part of something with his brother, and his brother was disgusted by the idea he was a lawyer. Then with the Howard scam, Jimmy tried to persuade Kim that their best bet was to leave Howard alone, again embracing a good choice road. But his desire to be a part of something with Kim overruled his judgment. With both of these betrayals, Jimmy was trying to take a good choice road, and he was also looking to have a memorable bond with loved ones. The good choice road ultimately did him no good, and the desire to have a lasting bond with Chuck and Kim led to painful betrayals. It's as if Jimmy said, "Screw that, I may as well march my way down the worst choice road imaginable, marching to the beat of my own drum, and that's the only way to truly get ahead." The game is inherently stacked, and Chuck and Kim both made Jimmy feel like a sucker. Jimmy hated that. From his childhood lesson he learned about wolves and sheep. He never wanted to be a sucker like his old man. But Chuck and Kim, the only two people we've ever known him to truly love, they both played him, they both used him, and they both manipulated him. And before those betrayals, you get the sense that James would have done anything he could have reasonably done for either of them. When Kim suggested that Gene turn himself in, just like he did after Chuck betrayed him, and then it was amplified further after Kim betrayed him, and then it was further amplified again after that phone call. That was the most irresponsible and reckless version of Goodman we had ever seen, where even his value for self-preservation was seemingly abandoned altogether. This led Mean Gene down a warpath where he nearly crossed a line he had never before crossed. First when he was about to bash the cancer patient over the head with a doggy urn, and then again when he was seemingly on the verge of being violent toward Marion. But he couldn't do it. In large part, I still maintain that was because he didn't have it in him. He wasn't a killer, at least not one who actively got his hands dirty. But regardless, Marion's words that she trusted him rang deep, and somewhere inside him, she reached whatever trace of James McGill that still existed beneath the surface of Mean Gene Takavic. She managed to tap into that same part of James that still existed when he put his humanity on full display after sacrificing his own reputation in elder law in order to restore the reputation he had ruined in Irene Landry. Unfortunately for Mean Gene, Marion was cool under pressure. She got the license plate, he was captured, and he had a few aces up his sleeve to cut the deal of a lifetime. When provided with the details of Kim's confession and the fact that Cheryl was looking to lawyer up for a civil suit against Kim, the words of Marion must have reverberated through his mind just enough to chill his soul, because in that moment, his inner James McGill, which had been dormant and was reawakened by Marion, was now back in control, banishing the Mean Gene monster forever and taking responsibility for his actions as Saul Goodman. It was in this moment that he decided once again to venture down a good choice road, except this time, he wasn't doing it for Chuck. he wasn't doing it for Kim. And he wasn't doing it to be a part of something bigger with a loved one. He was doing it for himself, a way to cleanse his own tainted soul. Jimmy and Kim had proven to sometimes have a toxic influence on each other, but in a very real way, they also proved to be the motivating force that led them each to redemption. Kim was inspired to finally come clean when Jimmy called her out on her hypocrisy, noting that anyone who would care is no longer alive. And when Jimmy learned Kim came clean, and he learned what she was facing, he decided to follow her lead, as he had so many times before. First, when she inspired him to become a lawyer while they were working the mailroom at HHM. Then when her toxic persistence persuaded him to go along with her scheme to ruin poor Howard. And then finally in the end, when Jimmy proved to himself that he wasn't the irredeemable scumbag everyone he loved thought him to be. His inner James McGill shone bright, and James finally grieved the death of his brother and confessed his role in ruining Chuck. Kim herself got to witness this, and she may not have known about Jimmy's role in the malpractice. She likewise finally saw Jimmy grieve, something that tore her apart when Jimmy showed no emotion reading that letter from Chuck, back when Chuck was proud of Jimmy, before Jimmy embarrassed Chuck by getting a degree from the University of American Samoa. McGill finally took responsibility for Chuck, and fittingly he did so in a court of law. Something of a sacred cathedral for the intellectual giant that was Charles McGill. This all ties back to Goodman's biggest regret, the slip and fall injury that initially put him on the bad choice road that saw James McGill become Slippin Jimmy. James was always using that guise as a coping mechanism whenever he felt not just betrayed, but deep emotional pain of any variety. In the end, James McGill won the day in his own defining moment. Slippin Jimmy, Saul Goodman, and mean Gene Takavic, they all took a back seat to James McGill, the kind-hearted soul who took care of his big brother for no other reason than he was his brother and it was the right thing to do. And ironically, now that Goodman is forever doomed to life in prison, he's freer than he ever was hiding under the guise of Takavic. And he's right at home with the criminal element he was always able to naturally connect with. Saul Goodman, king of the shitters. Celebrated and revered by the criminal element that surrounds him now, McGill can live out the rest of his days being true to himself, without being a constant prisoner to his own guilt for all of his past misdeeds. Perhaps chief among them, not getting Chuck the help he needed when he deliberately ignored the advice from the doctor about Chuck's illness being mental and not physical. As McGill was just beginning his new life behind bars, where all of his life experience points should serve him masterfully well, he got a final visit from Kim. She got to pull one last con with her no expiration date card, where she shared a final smoke with Jimmy, and they bid each other a final farewell. A lot of people think Kim can just con her way in whenever she wants, and maybe she can. What the hell do I know? I've proven time and time again that I'm no Quasimodo. But in my mind, this was the last time they laid eyes on each other. And I thought it was a damn fine ending to a damn fine series in a damn fine universe. The only thing I feel cheated out of is the Ernesto Lyle duet, and I do think it was a big missed opportunity not casting Kevin Costner as the yup guy. And in defense of that dude, he seemed like a nice enough guy even if he was clueless that Miracle Whip is no mayo substitute. And who knows, maybe that was the best sex Kim ever had in her life.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Saul may be gone forever, but James McGill had been reborn. And in that sense, James McGill was able to turn around and do a 180 and head down a good choice road for himself, symbolically saving his soul from that dreaded slip and fall injury that turned him into Slippin Jimmy. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and have a wonderful night.
Delicious chicken griddle fry. Yep. 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 Yep.
He's conning you.
Jimmy, what if you're wrong? I was done. You understand? I didn't beat the rap. Chuck flew in and saved my ass. It's time to make some changes.
You're Slippin Jimmy. What do you got to change, huh?
Victor with a K.
Cool. Victor with a K.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do, and so do I.
You got me mixed up with someone. My name is Takavic. Gene Takavic.
Mr. Goodman, sit down and stay seated.
The name's McGill. I'm James McGill.
You are not Kevin Costner.
I was last night.
Yep. 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 Yep.
You know, Quasimodo predicted all this.
Who is this? That, my friend, is Albuquerque's public enemy number one.
Pollos hermanos, delicious chicken griddle fry. Pollos hermanos, pollos hermanos.
Man, Artie's really going for it.
Yes, he is.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
You're done. You are done.
Don't drink and drive, but if you do, call me.
Have an A1 day. Mom, you forgot to say it.
Yeah.